Welcome to our episode of Reach Minds, Thoughts for Your Life's Journey podcast. In today's session, we're going to explore Equine Guided Leadership experience. Equine Guided Leadership is a unique experiential learning approach that leverages that innate sensitivity and responsiveness of horses to help individuals and teams develop and enhance their leadership skills. This kind of leadership training has been described as a unique and powerful learning experience that can help individuals, teams develop the essential skills and qualities needed for effective leadership in today's complex and dynamic world. In today's session, I'm joined by Sumit Rai, who is currently working as a Chief Product Officer at Blackbird PLC. However, in 2012, Sumit, who was the founder and CEO of Kulu Valley, when he undertook and experienced this leadership training working with horses. In today's session, Sumit shares what he learned about himself and how he has learned to lead others. This experience had such a profound impact on him that he took his whole leadership team through this experience. He shares what are unique insights and benefits that he and his team gained and how he has continued to directly enhance his leadership skills through this experience. Welcome, Sumit.
Hi there, Nita. Good to be here.
Now, last week, we had David Harris come and do a podcast on working with horses. And now we're focusing on today your own personal experience. Tell me, what was the catalyst for you doing this leadership training?
Well, I originally did it as part of a executive coaching that I was doing anyway, and my coach, Sarah, had suggested that towards the end of the sort of year-long sessions that we were in, that it would be a good idea to work with the horses, which at the time obviously sounded quite strange to me. It was completely not out of character, but it was not at all anything like either I'd done before or that we had really even discussed as part of our coaching. But she suggested it and I trusted her, so we did it.
And when you thought about horses, what went through your mind doing this work with horses?
To be honest, I had absolutely no idea what we were going to be doing, and I had no idea of the role until I'd actually gone through the experience, where now it makes complete sense. But of course, to me at the time, and even when I sort of describe it to others, it sounds like the strangest thing, if anything, a little bit out there and a bit weird. But it was just such an effective way to learn some of the lessons that I learned actually about leadership.
David was very nice about framing the whole thing around working with horses. I'd be really interested in how your experience manifested itself over the time you were there.
I think the reason Sarah had suggested that we work with the horses, which again at the time until I did it was sort of completely unknown to me, the reason or the rationale behind it. But essentially as part of my coaching, one of the things that we had uncovered was that I had a few things that I was struggling with from a leadership point of view to get done or to achieve. And she really believed that actually using the horses and going through the horse course would really help me in that instance. And it did. The challenges that I was having challenges leading a sales team, leading a marketing team. We were a software company, and by background, I'm a software engineer, so I had no problems really understanding the software engineers and understanding other parts of the business, but I definitely struggled with other parts of the business that I did not necessarily myself resonate with so much. And we had uncovered a few problems or a few areas that I was unable to sort of be effective in. And I almost remember it to this day. Sarah had listened to me rant for about an hour about our sales and marketing team. And I didn't understand why they weren't going to operate more like engineers or more like me. And I remember at the end, she said, do you want to make it your life goal to re-educate these people, or do you want to sell your company for lots of money? And I remember being presented with that choice, and it was just such an obvious choice that actually if I could get away from my mind that these are how a group of people operate that's not used to how I operate, and actually to turn it around to use them. So that was the catalyst. And after she said that, it sort of clicked in my mind that, yeah, guess what? My actually number one priority is to get this company to do well and eventually to exit this company. And so she said, look, what we can do is we can work with horses, which are, again, you're not a horse. You don't understand horses. You're not a horse. You won't behave like a horse, but we can use them as a proxy. And so when I went there, it was made very clear by the trainer that, look, horses are like, just imagine that they're like humans. They're obviously not like you. They're not going to operate like you. You can't bribe them. That's the best thing about horses. In real life with humans, we can bribe them with money. Now, you can bribe a horse with sugar. But if you take sugar away from the situation, the horse will essentially operate and behave a little bit like a human. It's just the reactions are more extreme. So it becomes quite easy to divorce yourself from having a personality fight with another human being into actually sitting there in front of something that weighs hundreds of kilos that you can't move on your own. You can't make it do anything. The horse will do what it wants to do, and it will only choose to lead you if it decides that you, or if the horse decides that you are a leader. So we did a number of experiments, which started very simply with, can you lead a horse by the rope? That was very easily done. The horse would comfortably go along with me. Then David said, okay, well, let's take the lead away and see if the horse just follows you. That was successful, and the horse managed to sort of follow me around. So he was like, okay, you have some natural leadership skills. The problems came in when we set the horse up to do quite an elaborate course with sort of little objects that were in the way, and I was walking around the course and the horse was meant to be following me, I kept checking back constantly to make sure the horse was doing the right thing. And I'd noticed that every time I checked back, the horse would look back behind, because the horse thinks I'm looking at something. He's following. He had no problem. And he's like, why do you keep checking on me? So he thinks there's something going on behind him. So he kept looking back. And that was a really good way for John to explain that, look, when there's a complex task, do you essentially micromanage, or do you essentially not trust the people who are supposed to be following your direction? And that uncovered an absolute truth, that I expected people to operate in a way that I was comfortable with or that I expected. And I'd constantly check on them to make sure they were doing it right in my mind. And of course, that was just made very clear to me when the horse, because you can't argue with a horse. I mean, you can't verbalize your argument or frustration or blame it for anything. You've just got to react to or see how it reacts. And so it made it really clear to me that actually the trouble is I'm not just going forth and saying, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going, and then trusting the people behind would just follow and find their own way of following, essentially.
When you learnt this, John pointing out to you and you turned around and the horse turned around, how easy was it for you to just kind of focus at the front and not look behind? Did it come sort of instantly, or did you have to sort of tell yourself, I need to be looking forward rather than turning around?
It was as clear as day. The reaction of the horses when then explained it, everything clicked in my mind. If you'd have done the same thing with people, it wouldn't have clicked. But the moment it was with a horse, because we don't have there's no fight going on with a horse. There's no pecking order. There's nothing. There's no contention. It is just a horse. And the moment he was like, look, this is what's happening. You're checking on the horse. The horse is now unsure of what you're doing because you keep checking on it. It's checking behind itself, thinking something else is happening. But if you just do this again, but stay with your head forward, walk. You can talk if you want to say, follow me or whatever you want to say, but never look back. And then we did the course again. And this time I kept facing forward and I just went with purpose. And I went with absolute confidence that the horse was going to come with me. And we probably completed the course within half the time. The horse was merrily following along. And it was a real big eye-opening lesson for me that actually just go forth and lead and tell people where we're going and be positive about that movement, and they will follow. But if you constantly are checking in on them, constantly second-guessing their choices, Or worse, it's the chef that always comes along and tastes the sous chef's food and then always, out of a matter of principle, adds a bit of salt or adds a bit of pepper. They don't realize how much that undermines the work of the person who's actually been preparing it. And unless it's wrong, and if it's wrong, then of course it's totally okay to say, this is not quite right. But if it's near enough right, you're far better off going, fantastic, good job, let's keep going. That will make them better and better and better. And that's what I took away as one of the many lessons that I learned from that experience.
I guess what that evokes in me is what you're saying is about trust. So the trust that, and letting go, so trusting that other people will do the instructions or the vision that you're sharing, and trusting that people will deliver without your kind of micromanaging that. And that must be a powerful lesson, because trust often in organization within teams can be quite low, really.
David explained a lot of how horses work, which is that it's almost on the beg for forgiveness. So you trust them. You trust people. You've got to get into a position of trusting people and going along with it and accepting that they're going to do it a bit different. They're going to do it a little bit their own way. Yeah. But as long as they get within 95% or 90% or something of what you need, it doesn't matter whether they take the long way round or the short way round. And we've seen that in many other phases. People have their favorite way they want to travel to get from A to B. It may not be your route. It may be just their route. And you don't know their reasons. Their reason could be, it's just a more scenic route. Their reasons could be that, I feel more comfortable on this road. And so as long as they're going to get to where you want to get to within a reasonable time frame or budget or something, then actually allow people to go about their own way. If it goes completely wrong, that's when you can step in. And that's what happens in horses. The leader of the pack will eventually step in if a horse is going too far off course or something.
You had this sort of profound experience and things that you learnt about yourself. And it was so great for you that you decided to engage your whole team in that. Tell us about the team experience and what the team learned and yourself as the leader of that team.
Well, as you said, I walked away from this experience probably as one of the most eye-opening and definitely the day that I'd spent most in my life in business where I learned most. And it's crazy because I'm a software engineer. My company was building software products. I've been to hundreds of conferences. I've spoken at hundreds of conferences. I've been in thousands of meetings. And yet this one day with horses taught me more than any other day that I'd spent in any other medium. And whilst now I had this new set of skills that already was beginning to work when I got back to the office, in fact, people were a bit surprised by me that I was giving them more free rein and free will. They thought there was something wrong. They were almost waiting for the catch. It was so successful and I felt great about it. And what I wanted to do was take my management team, and we were a team of 8. And we actually sold the company within a year, or just about a year after we did the course together.
Really?
Yeah. And we were planning for it. We were getting ready for sale. And so I knew that, look, we got this last stretch, and anyone who's ever been through an exit will know that last year, or even if it's 3 months, if you're lucky to make that the length of the process, it is one of the toughest things that anybody will ever do. Mentally, emotionally, you've got to manage shareholders, you've got to manage yourself, you've got to manage the business, etc. So I needed the management team to be absolutely all of us working together. What he did was adapted or had the group version of the course, which essentially looked at the theory of how horses move. And I loved what he said to me, and I believe he said it in your session with him, that horses have been around for millions and millions of years, and we have not. So we do this in general. We tend to think that we're at the top of the food train, we're the most intelligent animal, we're the best at everything. Well, we know that we're not physically the best. No one would argue that they're stronger than a gorilla. No one could carry as much as a horse or be as strong as a bull. But yet somehow in our minds, things of the mind, we think that we're far superior to them. Turns out that horses are actually better at working in teams than humans are. And of course, you can have an amazing teamwork. As a basketball fan, the Chicago Bulls 1990s team was a amazing team at working together. But we've all seen teams that don't work so well together, even if they're full of great individuals.
Yeah.
But horses are just much better at working in teams. And so horses work with a leader at the front, a number 2, which is like a COO at the back of the pack, and then the sort of flankers, the 3s and 4s, which sit on the side of the pack, making sure everyone stays in line. And it just resonated so much. So when we came together as a group, he already knew that there was 4 of us that were working really well together. I think it's important to note that everybody on a personal level got on incredibly well. We were very respectful of each other. There was no personnel issues, but there definitely was a working together issue, which was, like I said, not contentious or awkward. It was just not effective. But there were 4 of us who did work incredibly well together, and 4 who were all individually talented and worked great within their own environment, but didn't necessarily work well with the group. So David, knowing this, sort of divided the group into one group, 4 in the other group. We arranged ourselves where each of the teams had one leader at the front and had somebody at the back, and then had flankers on the side. And David was aware of this. He was really aware of the sort of different structure that we had. So he divided the team in 2 groups of 4, which felt random, but actually it was definitely predetermined. And there were 4 of us who got on very well, and I was at the leader, and we had somebody at the back, and then we had 2 people on the side of the horse. And we set off on the course, and we went round every object, and we were communicating verbally, but we weren't touching the horse. The horse was just in the middle of us as a sort of a quad configuration, and we got all the way around the course and we finished it. Whereas the other group, they had arranged themselves as a leader, someone at the back and someone on the sides, and the horse didn't even move off the start goal.
Wow.
They couldn't communicate. Even they were so talking over each other and unsure of even though they'd appointed a leader, the leader wasn't in charge. And the horse ended up going backwards and walked into a field. And David brought us all together, and he sat everyone down, and he ended up saying, I think his first question was, who thinks the horse is broken? And immediately the team just looked at each other and just looked at the ground and shook their heads and just said, it's us. We're the problem. And he did a number of exercises with us as a group again, and some trust exercises and other things like that. And by the end of that session, we had a framework with which we worked together for the next year until we were sold, where we would even talk in the language of, okay, in this particular incident, I'll be number 1, someone else will be number 2, and someone else will play 3s and 4s. So
it became a shared language.
It became a shared language. And when we had incidents, like we had an outage at our data center, we immediately, there's no point, I have no role to play. All I can do is support. So immediately our head of support, Paul, would be a number 1. He's in charge because he's the one who knows most. And the best role I can do is just be a number 2 and just sit at the back, making sure that everyone else who's involved in this process is going along with it. And depending on what we were tackling, whether it was the contracts we were having to go through, getting our clients in shape, or suppliers all nailed down, we would just, for the next 12 months, we just operated in that manner. And it took all of the sting and contention and difficulty and humanness, actually, at times, out of the situation. And it just became very effective.
The goal of and the motivation of selling the company became what everybody was moving towards. However, how people worked with each other and took their own egos out, it seems to me, a little bit as well.
It does. If there's one thing that the horse experience, whether you're doing it as an individual or as a group, does, is it absolutely takes the ego out of any situation. You've seen this, it's not just with horses. I mean, these are hundreds of kilo animal. You can't move them physically. It's impossible. You see the same thing when you see people come up against silverback gorillas. They instantly understand. It doesn't matter how strong you are. It doesn't matter how much money you have. If you're sat opposite a silverback, they're in charge. In what is their skill, what they are superior at than us, is a really humbling experience, because we think we're the best, not just within the animal or the living soul sort of sphere. We think we're the best within our, and we think we're the best within our society. We think we're the best within around the world. And there's nothing wrong with being patriotic or being sort of having a little bit of ego, but it's actually just one of these wonderful experiences where you have to put your ego aside because there's no way in the world you're going to win.
And I guess that's where horses in particular, they're not working with egos, they're working with energy, aren't they? They're working with they're using their internal processes, however they are, to make sense of the world. They're not having to prove anything. They're just being, aren't they?
They are. They're very different animals, obviously, than us. Their main purpose is survival. They've been incredibly effective at survival. They've lasted millions of years. They aren't bothered by the things that we've, as humans, that was our main concern 100,000 years ago, was surviving the day and cooperating with each other. Since then, we've layered all sorts of strange or abstract things, whether we care about what club we're part of, we care about our ranking in a wider society, we care about material things, we care about all these things. We completely rewired our brain. We care about how many likes this podcast is going to get. We've created all these really strange different things that we care about, whereas the horse is still a horse there's no difference in horses today than there was 100,000 years ago or 1,000,000 years ago. They're the same beast, the same priorities.
Yeah, and one of the things I remember David saying with horses was that, as you touched on it, that a horse won't move if he or she feels the energy isn't okay. And I'm interested in, you were saying earlier on about how easy it was for you to move the horses, really. And I'm just kind of curious, what do you think it saw in you that it responded and followed you so easily?
I think they like confidence. I think that horses...
But it's more inner though, isn't it? It's not outer, is it?
Absolutely, because we all know people who are... Well, I'd almost argue the definition of bossy is outward confidence, but absolutely no respect from the other side. That's the definition of bossy. And we all know bossy people, and we know that they sort of believe that they should be given this role, or they're taking this role of leadership. And almost by definition, no one is interested in following them. And I think if you acted like that around a horse, they just walk away from you.
So 13 years on, Sumit, what's been a lasting impact and what has continued to transform your own leadership?
So obviously, after doing the course, we had a year of selling the company, which I was very much in charge of. What happened afterwards was actually not 100% to do with doing the course, but the course definitely influenced it, is every role that I've done there afterwards, which included being Chief Experience Officer at Kulu Inc., which was the company, the NASDAQ company that acquired Kulu Valley, and then future roles in Vegas Creative Software and now at Blackbird PLC. The roles that I do now are leadership roles and not management roles. What I learned from the horses was that actually the leader at the front, or the horse at the front, is a leader. They're not a manager. The managers are actually the number 2, 3, and 4 position. And in the UK in particular, we're very accustomed to making the person at the head of the company essentially a manager. Whereas in America, it's quite the opposite, especially in Silicon Valley. If you look at in software companies, the CEOs tend to be leaders, not managers. So Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, they tend to be leaders, and they tend to set direction, and they tend to go, but they don't tend to be too involved in the day-to-day business. In the UK, it's the opposite. They literally, you end up, the better you are at management, the higher you grow, which is very different than leadership. And so for me, I don't manage very many people at the moment. It's my intention to manage as few people as possible, but I do have a leadership role. So my role is much more in strategy and direction, and it's a lot less in the day-to-day nitty-gritty of how we get there. And that, I think, has come from doing the course as well as just sort of my own findings.
But it also seems to me that in addition to what you're saying, it's also around people following you. So it's not just only about having a a vision, but actually getting people to buy into that and for people to follow that as well. And I guess all the various roles that you've had over the years, that has also happened.
Yeah, I'm very, very lucky that a lot of what I've learned throughout the years, and probably had an amount of at the beginning, but certainly got better at it, is I do frequently hear from people that they are willing to lead on my direction. And I only operate, I experimented outside of the industry that I'm in, which is really specifically video technology. And I didn't know enough to be a leader, because I think leadership also comes with obviously domain knowledge. But I know a lot about the area that I'm in. It's my chosen mastermind subject, and it's the subject that I'm most comfortable with. And so I have opinions obviously in the space. And so the current product that I'm building, Elevate.io, as part of Blackbird's product offering, is a lot to do with my vision of where I see things going in the video space. And I'm just very grateful that a lot of the people who work within the organization sort of understand and see that vision and are following it.
If we were to kind of round this up, what would be sort of pieces of wisdom or a motto that you might like to share with people?
I think the biggest takeaway is know exactly what position you're in. So, and by the way, you can morph. There's a certain situation you can morph, and I'll give you one example of that. But know which one you are. Are you, one, a leader at the front? Are you a two, a sort of a manager or a COO style person pushing from behind? Are you a flanker on the sides, just sort of cajoling people in general? Know the position you're in, I think, is a super important thing. And you see that with horses as well. You see that what with the pack that were together when I did the course, I'm sure it's obviously changed. It's been 12 years. But the pack that I was with, the youngest horse they had, who I think was called Bo, and he was a grass expert. So whenever they went into the field to graze, Bo would take the lead and find the good grass. And then they'd all eat where he decided was the best place to eat. So even though you can move around depending on the situation, ultimately the most important thing is to know what you are. Are you a number one or a number two? And if you are a number two and trying to act like a number one, it is absolutely not going to work. And if you're a number one trying to act like a number two, you may be able to do it for a short period of time, but you will just probably not be very good at it.
But you're also saying, I think for me, is that rank and status isn't always set in concrete as well.
Yeah, it can move.
Because it can move, that you can deploy your different places within the context that you're operating in it. So it's what's needed. Just kind of finishing off, what would be a motto you could share with us?
It's a cliche, but I think it is just to be yourself. Trying to operate outside of your capabilities and comfort zone, it never goes well. It doesn't mean you can't grow into something and that then therefore becomes you. But this is, again, an example of what we said earlier around bossy people. Bossy is the definition of demanding with no rank. It's when we all know it, when we see it, and it just doesn't work. No one's interested. No one wants to follow the bossy person. And if they are, it's literally for, in the case of a horse, because someone's got some sugar, or in the case of humans, it's usually money driven. And even then, that's okay. If you're willing to do work for money, you're a hired gun, that's fine. Just know that you're doing it for money. So I think it's really to be yourself, to be honest with yourself about what your skill set really is. And if your skill set isn't there, you could be a fantastic, especially in the world of software, you could be a brilliant software engineer with a brilliant idea, but you may not be a great leader, then employ a leader.
Thank you, Sumit. This has been a great insight into your experience of working with horses, but also more than that around what it's given you. Those of you listening, if you enjoyed this podcast, pass it on to your friends and family.